The first thing I saw were blue lights washing across the front of my house. Not the neighbor's house. Mine. I'd barely had the keys 12 hours. The lawn was still trimmed from the bank's final showing. The lockbox had just been removed that morning. I was inside measuring the living room when I noticed the reflection flickering across the hardwood floors. When I stepped outside, 2 patrol cars were angled at the curb, and about 20 feet away stood a woman in a pressed linen blazer, arms folded tight, chin lifted like she was overseeing a transaction. I didn't recognize him, she was telling the officers. He looked suspicious. We have standards here. Then, loud enough for me to hear, she added. He doesn't belong here. One of the officers approached and asked for identification. I handed him my driver's license. Then I reached into the folder, tucked under my arm, and handed him the recorded deed. What she didn't know was simple. I wasn't visiting. I was the new owner, and calling the cops wasn't her mistake. It was just the beginning. I've never been the loudest man in a room. I grew up around men who worked with their hands and let paperwork do the talking. My father framed houses for 30 years. Nights, he'd sit at the kitchen table reviewing contracts with a pencil and a yellow pad. He used to tell me, if it's not written, it's noise. That stuck. I started in construction straight out of high school, learned how walls hide shortcuts, learned how small details cost big money later. By my mid-30s, I wasn't just building houses anymore, I was buying them. Nothing flashy, no luxury flips. I look for distressed properties in stable neighborhoods, solid schools, steady tax base, places where the numbers make sense even when emotions don't. I don't invest for status. I invest for insulation, for options, for my kids to inherit assets instead of stories about what almost worked. This house came through a foreclosure auction, mortgage default, clean title after bank processing. I reviewed the HOA documents before bidding bylaws, fee schedules, enforcement provisions. On paper, it looked structured, predictable. I assumed professionalism. That was my first miscalculation. But I've learned something about miscalculations. They only hurt if you walk in unprepared. I learned her name the same night she called the police. She introduced herself to the officers before she ever acknowledged me. HOA president. 3 terms. Retired from corporate management, according to the neighborhood website. Mid-50s, precise diction, posture like she was still running boardrooms. Everything about her communicated order. Within 48 hours, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Official letterhead, formal review notice. It questioned my landscaping compliance on a lawn maintained by the bank's contractor. It requested architectural approval documentation for any intended exterior modifications, even though I hadn't submitted a single permit. It asked for proof of occupancy status and a projected timeline for residency. 72 hours after getting my keys, I spoke to a neighbor while checking the side fence line. He kept his voice low. "She's big on standards," he said. Then, after a pause, "Depends who you are. Selective enforcement isn't loud. It's subtle. It hides behind procedure. She used paper like a warning shot. I've always used paper differently, to document, to measure, to build leverage." That was the moment I stopped seeing her as a nuisance and started seeing her as a pattern. The second letter arrived 5 days later. Uncle-eyed presence prior to registration. According to the timestamp on their internal log, I had accessed the property before completing HOA intake paperwork. The intake packet had been emailed to me 24 hours after the police visit. 2 days after that, I was fined for improper trash bin placement. I hadn't placed a bin on the curb. The city collection date wasn't for another week. Then came the line that caught my attention. Potential legal review regarding suspected rental activity inconsistent with community character. I hadn't listed the property, hadn't spoken to a leasing agent, hadn't advertised anything. So how did she know about rental intent? The answer wasn't in the letters. It was in the room. I attended the next HOA meeting and sat in the back. Didn't speak, just listened. They distributed a financial summary to homeowners' standard quarterly disclosure. 3 board members were listed as over 90 days delinquent on dues. No liens noted. No enforcement action pending. The president moved past that page quickly. Selective pressure isn't random. It's directional. If she wanted to make this procedural, that was fine. I'd make it procedural too. That weekend, I pulled county records. Foreclosure files are public. So are lien filings. The previous homeowner hadn't just defaulted on the mortgage. 6 months before the bank initiated foreclosure, the HOA had filed a lien for unpaid dues. Standard procedure, at least on paper, but the timeline was inconsistent. The bylaws required escalation after 90 days delinquent. Notice, lien, referral to collections. In this case, the lien was filed, then nothing. No aggressive recovery. No push for judicial enforcement. The account drifted while fees accumulated. Eventually, the bank moved first. That hesitation cost the association money. Then I cross-referenced the board roster with the delinquency summary I'd seen at the meeting. 2 current board members were past 90 days. No liens filed. No recorded notices. Same bylaws. Different applications. Selective enforcement isn't just unfair. In an HOA, it can become a breach of fiduciary duty. Board members are obligated to act in the association's financial interest, not their own comfort. Most people skim bylaws. I read them the way other men read headlines, line by line, intent by intent. And just as the pattern started to settle into focus, she sent an email that made it personal. Her email arrived at 6:42 a.m. Subject line, Community Compliance Review. It was written carefully. Too carefully. She stated that the board had reason to question representations made regarding intended occupancy. She noted that ownership within the community carried eligibility expectations consistent with long-standing neighborhood standards. Then the line that lingered. The association reserved the right to review whether my presence aligned with the character this community has worked hard to preserve. Nothing explicit, nothing you could circle in red and win a headline with, but the implication was there. I read it twice. Then a third time, I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to a real estate attorney I'd worked with before. We scheduled a call. I sent him the prior notices, the delinquency summary, the lien timelines. While he reviewed those, I pulled fair housing guidelines and compared enforcement actions across publicly available records. Violation letters to some homeowners went out within days. Others lingered for months without penalty. Parts tell stories. By the end of the week, I had a spreadsheet. Dates, infractions, responses, outcomes. Board members consistently fell on the softer side of enforcement. New owners, especially those flagged as investors, did not. My attorney was measured. Don't accuse, he said. Ask, on record. Specific questions. Force procedural clarity. He explained fiduciary exposure, selective enforcement, financial negligence. None of it dramatic, all of it real. If they double down, he added, that's when it becomes actionable. I thanked him and drafted a certified letter requesting formal clarification of policy application and delinquency enforcement practices. Once that letter went out, there was no casual path back to normal. We were moving from irritation to record, and records change outcomes. I mailed the letter certified, return receipt requested. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't aggressive. It was structured. I requested a full accounting of all delinquent accounts exceeding 90 days. I asked for documented enforcement timelines applied over the past 12 months. I requested written confirmation that all current board members were in compliance with dues and assessment obligations, as required under the association's own bylaws. I cited the specific sections: fiduciary duty, uniform enforcement, conflict of interest provisions, no accusations, just transparency. When people misuse authority, they prefer ambiguity. Documentation narrows the room. 3 days after delivery confirmation, the violation notices against me stopped. No more fines, no more warnings about trash bins or occupancy intent. Silence can mean many things. In this case, it meant recalculation. A week later, I received the agenda for the upcoming board meeting. My name was listed under compliance discussion. Public forum, open floor, exactly where procedural questions carry weight. She thought she was summoning me. What she didn't realize was that I'd already chosen the venue. The clubhouse was fuller than usual. Folding chairs lined the back wall. Retirees, young couples, a few contractors still in work boots. People show up when they sense tension, even if no one names it. She called the meeting to order with her usual composure, spoke about community integrity and protecting property values. My name came up halfway through, framed as a routine compliance clarification. When she opened the floor, I stood. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I asked why liens had been filed against certain homeowners within 90 days, while others, specifically current board members, remained delinquent without recorded enforcement. I asked whether all directors were presently in good standing, as required under Section 4.3 of the bylaws. I asked whether enforcement timelines differed based on ownership status, resident versus investor. No accusations, just questions. Silence has a texture when it lands in a room. It settled slowly. She began to respond in generalities. I cited page numbers, dates, public filings. I never raised my voice. People shifted in their chairs. A few looked down at their copies of the financial summary. The tone had changed. And then I mentioned the foreclosure property next door. I explained that when I purchased my property at auction, I didn't stop there. 2 adjacent units had entered pre-foreclosure tied to unpaid dues and mortgage default. I secured contractual interest in both, one through direct purchase, the other through an assignment agreement pending final recording. Murmurs moved through the room. Under the bylaws, each property carried voting rights. Also under the bylaws, any board member more than 90 days delinquent was ineligible to vote or hold office. I let that sit. If the financial summary distributed that evening was accurate, 2 current directors were not in good standing, which meant 2 seats were technically inactive, which meant a special election could be called. I didn't demand it. I simply asked the association's counsel to confirm the procedure outlined in Section 5.2. Public humiliation isn't loud. It's administrative. Neighbors began asking their own questions about transparency, about consistency, about exposure to liability. Within 3 weeks, she announced her resignation, citing a desire to focus on family. A compliance review committee formed. Financial reporting became monthly instead of quarterly. I didn't buy the house to fight. I bought it to build. My father used to say, "Ownership is quiet. Power is paperwork." I never needed to prove I belonged. The deed already did.